Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Storytime with Uncle Monkey. I am your Uncle Monkey, and today's story is called One Eye, Two Eyes, Three Eyes. There once was a woman who had three daughters, of whom the eldest was named One Eye because she had only one eye in the middle of her forehead. The second had two eyes, like most people, and she was called Two Eyes. The youngest had three eyes, two like her second sister, and then one in the middle of her forehead, like the eldest, and she bore the name Three Eyes. Now, because little Two Eyes looked just like other people, her mother and sisters could not endure the sight of her. So they pushed her about and threw all their old clothes to her for her to wear, and gave her only the scraps and other pieces that were left to eat, and did everything they could to make her life completely miserable. It so happened that little Two Eyes was sent into the fields to take care of the goats, and she was often very hungry as she did so, although her sisters had as much to eat as they would like. One day, Two Eyes seated herself on a mound in the field and began to weep and cry so bitterly that two little rivulets flowed down from her eyes. Once, in the midst of her sorrow, she looked up and saw a woman standing near her who said, "What are you weeping for, little Two Eyes?" "I cannot help but weeping," she replied, "for because I have two eyes, like other people, my mother and my sisters cannot bear me. They push me about from one corner to another, and they make me wear their old clothes, and they give me nothing to eat but scraps, and I'm always hungry. Today they gave me so little that I am very nearly starved." "Dry your eyes, little Two Eyes," said the wise woman. "I will tell you something to do which will prevent you from ever being hungry again. You have only to say to your goat, 'Little goat, little goat, if you're able, pray deck out my table.' And immediately there will be a pretty little table before you full of all sorts of good things for you to eat as much as you like. And when you've had enough and you need the table to go away, you only need to say, 'Little goat, when you're able, remove my nice table.' And the goat will. Now, that is all you need to do, so dry your eyes." And the wise woman vanished. "Now I will try what the wise woman said, and if it's true, I won't be hungry anymore. Little goat, if you're able, pray deck out my table." The words were scarcely spoken when a beautiful little table stood before her, and it had a white cloth and fine plates, knives and forks and silver spoons, and such a delicious dinner, smoking hot as if it had come from the kitchen, that it was all Two Eyes could do but weep with joy. Two Eyes sat down and said the shortest grace she knew, "Pray God be our guest for all time. Amen." And then she allowed herself to taste everything. And oh, how she enjoyed her dinner! And when she had finished, as the wise woman had taught her, she said, "Little goat, when you're able, remove my nice table." In a moment, the table and everything upon it had disappeared. "That is a pleasant way to keep house," said little Two Eyes, and she was contented and happy. In the evening, when she went home with the goat, she found an earthenware dish with some scraps which her sisters had left out for her, but she did not touch them. The next morning she went away with the goat, leaving them behind where they had been placed for her. Now, the first and second times that Two Eyes did this, her sisters didn't notice it. But when they found it happened every day, they said to one another, "There is something strange about little Two Eyes. She leaves her supper every day, and all that has been put before her has been wasted. She must get her food from somewhere else." So they determined to find out the truth, and they arranged that when Two Eyes took her goat to the field, One Eye should go to her and take particular notice of what she did. So when Two Eyes started with her goat, One Eye said to her, "I am going with you today to see if the goats get fed properly while you are watching the rest." But Two Eyes knew what she had in her mind. She drove the goats into the long grass and said, Come, One Eye, let us sit down here and rest, and I will sing to you.
One Eye seated herself, and, not being accustomed to walk so far, or to be out in the heat of the sun, she began to feel tired, and as little Two Eyes kept on singing, she closed her one eye and fell asleep. When Two Eyes saw this, she knew that One Eye could not betray her, so she summoned her goat and her food, and then ate very quickly. And then when she was done, she repeated the wise woman's words.
Little goat, when you're able, come and clear away my table.
It vanished with the twinkling of an eye, and then little Two Eyes woke up One Eye and said,
One Eye, you are a clever one to watch goats, for while you are asleep, they would be running all over the world. Come, let's go home.
So they went to the house, and little Two Eyes again left the scraps on the dish untouched, and One Eye could not tell her mother whether Two Eyes had eaten anything in the field, for she had to excuse herself. I was asleep. The next day the mother said to Three Eyes, You must go to the field this time and find out whether there is anyone who brings food to little Two Eyes, for she must eat and drink secretly. So when little Two Eyes started with her goat, Three Eyes followed and said, I am going to go with you today to see if the goats are properly fed and watered. But Two Eyes knew her thoughts, so she led the goat through the long grass to tire out Three Eyes, and at last said,
Let us sit down here and rest, and I will sing to you, Three Eyes.
Three Eyes was glad to sit down, for the walk and the heat and the sun had really tired her, and as her sister continued her song, she was obliged to close two of her eyes, but the third eye stayed awake. Two Eyes, thinking she was asleep, said her speech to the goat, and the table came, and she ate, and then she said her speech again, and the table left. Three Eyes saw all of this with her one eye, and she pretended to sleep as it happened. Now her sister came and woke her up and took her home. Then her sister came and woke her up and took her home. That evening, when little Two Eyes again left the supper of scraps they placed aside for her, Three Eyes said to her mother, I know where the proud thing gets the food she's been eating and drinking. Then she described what she had seen in the field.
I saw it with my one eye, for she had tried to put me to sleep, but this one stayed awake.
Then the envious mother cried out to poor little Two Eyes, You wish to have better food than we, do you? You shall lose your wish. She took up a butcher's knife and went out and stuck the goat in the heart, and it fell dead. When Two Eyes saw this, it was too much for her, and she went out into the field, seated herself upon a mound, and wept most bitter tears. Presently the wise woman appeared before her and said,
Little Two Eyes, why do you weep?
Replied Two Eyes.
I must weep. The goat, who every day spread my table so beautifully, has been killed by my mother, and I shall have to again suffer from hunger and sorrow tomorrow. Little Two Eyes, said the wise woman, I will give you some good advice. Go home and ask your sister to give you the inside of the goat, and then go and bury it in the ground in front of the house.
On saying this, the wise woman vanished. Little Two Eyes went home quickly and said to her sister,
Dear sister, give me some part of my poor goat. I don't want anything valuable. Just give me the insides.
Her sister laughed and said,
Well, of course you can have that if you don't want anything valuable.
So little Two Eyes took the inside, and in the evening, when all was quiet, buried it in the ground outside the house door, as the wise woman had instructed her to do. The next morning, when they all rose and looked out of the window, there stood a most wonderful tree, with leaves of silver and apples of gold hanging between them. Nothing in the whole wide world could be more glorious or more costly. They none of them knew how the tree got there, except Two Eyes, who had planted it there. Then the mother said to little One Eye, Climb up, my child, and break off some of the fruit for me. I am hungry. One Eye climbed up, but when she tried to catch a branch and pluck one of the apples, it escaped from her hand, and so happened every time she would try. Do what you can. Perhaps you'll be able to see better with your 3 eyes than One Eye can. One Eye slid down the tree, defeated, and 3 eyes climbed up. But 3 eyes was no more skillful, and could not draw the branches to her, nor the fruit, and could not even pluck a leaf. She got down out of the tree, also defeated. At last the mother, who was impatient, climbed up herself, but with no more success, for, as she appeared to grasp a branch or fruit, her hand closed upon thin air.
"May I try?"
said Little Two Eyes.
"Perhaps I may succeed."
"You indeed!" cried her mother. "You with your 2 eyes! What can you do?" But Two Eyes climbed up, and the golden apples did not fly back from her touch, but almost laid themselves in her hand, and she plucked them one after another till she carried down her little apron full of apples. The mother took them from her and gave them to her sisters, as she said Little Two Eyes had not handled them properly. But this was only from jealousy, because Little Two Eyes was the only one who could reach the fruit, and she went into the house feeling more spiteful toward her than ever. It happened that while all 3 sisters were standing under the tree together, a young knight rode by.
"Run away, quick, and hide yourself, Little Two Eyes. Hide yourself somewhere, for we shall be ashamed to be seen with you."
Then they pushed the little girl in great haste under an empty cask which stood near the tree, and several of the golden apples that she had plucked went along with her. As the knight came nearer, they saw that she was a handsome woman, and presently she halted and looked with wonder and pleasure at the beautiful tree with its silver leaves and golden fruit. At last the knight spoke to the sisters and asked, "To whom does this beautiful tree belong?"
If a person possessed only one branch, she might obtain all the riches in the world. "This tree belongs to us,"
said the 2 sisters,
"and we will gladly break off a branch for you if you like."
They themselves had a great deal of trouble in trying to do as they offered, but all to no purpose, for the branches and the fruit evaded their efforts and sprung back at every touch. "This is wonderful, that the tree should belong to you, and yet you are not able to gather even a branch." The sisters persisted, however, in declaring that the tree was their property. At this moment, Little Two Eyes, who was angry with her sisters because they had not told the truth, caused 2 of the golden apples to slip out from under the cask, and they rolled right up to the knight's feet. The knight bent down and picked one up, and asked where it had come from. The 2 ugly maidens replied that they had another sister, but they dared not let the knight see her, for she had only 2 eyes, like common people, and was named Little Two Eyes. But the knight felt very anxious to see her, and called out, "Little Two Eyes, come here." Then came Little Two Eyes, quite comforted, from behind the empty cask, and the knight was astonished to find the little girl so beautiful. Then she said, "Little Two Eyes, can you break off a branch from the tree for me?"
"Oh, yes," she replied, "I can, very easily, for the tree belongs to me."
And she climbed up, without any trouble at all, broke off a branch with its silver leaves and golden fruit, and gave it to the wonderful knight. She looked down at her as she stood by her horse, and said, "Little Two Eyes, what shall I give you for this?"
"Ah," she answered, "I suffer from hunger and thirst and sorrow and trouble from early morning till late at night. If you would only take me with you and release me, I should be ever so happy."
Then the knight lifted the little maiden onto her horse and rode home with her to her father's castle. There she was given beautiful clothes to wear and as much to eat and drink as she wished. And as she grew up, the young knight loved her so dearly that they were married with great rejoicings. Now, the day the 2 sisters saw Little Two Eyes carried away by the beautiful knight, they were overjoyed at their good fortune.
"The wonderful tree belongs to us now. Even if we cannot break off a branch, everybody who passes it will stop to admire it and will make acquaintance with us, and who knows, we may get married after all."
But when they rose the next morning, lo, the tree had vanished, and along with it all their hopes. And on this very morning, when Little Two Eyes looked out of her chamber window of the castle, she saw, to her great joy, that the tree had followed her. Little Two Eyes lived for a long time in great happiness, but she had heard nothing of her sisters, till one day 2 poor women came to the castle to beg for alms. Little Two Eyes saw them and recognized their faces instantly, for one had only 1 eye and the other had 3. And they were clearly her sisters, and had become so poor that they were obliged to beg for their bread from door to door. But the good sister received them most kindly, and promised to take care of them and give them all they wanted, and they did not want for anything. And they repented and feel sorry for having treated her so badly in their youthful days, and they all lived happily ever after. The end.